So this new deal isn't a proposal, it's a threat. We're telling Ukraine that they need to accept it or we're cutting off military and intelligence support. This led Ukrainian President Zelensky yesterday to tell his people that they're being forced to choose between, quote, the loss of our dignity or the risk of losing a key partner. That partner, of course, being the United States. Now, this plan is pretty receptive to Russian demands and runs right through multiple red lines that Ukraine and Europe have repeatedly voiced. But even still, Putin's response is that Russia is prepared to continue the war to achieve all of their goals militarily. So let's get into what we know. And today we're going to be getting into the details of this plan, as well as the reactions from Ukraine, the United States, Europe, and Russia. Now, bottom line up front, how this looks today, Ukraine is likely to reject this deal, kind of a soft rejection, in that they're probably going to put forward their own proposal. It sounds like Europe is working on that counteroffer today. Russia has already distanced themselves, in fact, a little bit from this, with Putin adding that they're ready, if need be, to win this war on the battlefield. And the United States has said that there is no room for negotiation, which is going to be a problem for a lot of reasons. But also, strangely, nobody seems willing to go on the record to talk about this new deal. Now, I'm just back after a couple days from the Dubai Air Show in the UAE. I left the morning of the tragic crash that cost the life of the Indian pilot. Awful news there. I was not on site when that occurred. We do have a couple videos coming out in the next couple days focused on the Ukrainian company Skyfall. Their Vampire, Shrike, and P-1 Sun drones all on display at the air show. We did a walk through the flight line looking at Russian Su-57, US A-10, and then even more, and then highlighted some of the newest autonomous vehicles and advanced weapon systems being developed by the Edge Group. All of that set to come out in the next week or two. Now, looking at the peace plan, this was leaked, apparently, to Axios. So looking at some of their reporting, they say, quote, the plan was drafted by Trump's envoy Steve Witkoff from input from Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Trump's son-in-law Jared Kushner. Witkoff also consulted with Russian envoy Kirill Dmitriev on the plan. Dmitriev told Axios he is optimistic about it because, unlike past efforts, we feel like the Russian position is really being heard. And then Reuters reported earlier that the Trump administration had set a November 27th deadline for Ukraine to accept the American plan, warning that military and intelligence support could be halted otherwise. So something to keep in mind there. First off, the positive outlook by Dmitriev. You're going to hear kind of his take and how he's framing any objections to this deal as pure warmongering. The only rational response to this, if you're against it, is that you're a warmonger. And notably here, they say that Rubio was involved in the drafting of this plan, which kind of contradicts some things that he said about this peace process less than a week ago. We'll get into that here in a minute. I do want to run through a couple of it's a 28-point plan. I pulled out a couple here that I think are most notable that I thought were worth going into. I am going to share the full document, the full 28-part plan, and all of these articles in the description below if you want to go through them in more detail. The first one, bouncing around a little bit here, has to do with territory. And we all knew this would be a major focus of any peace plan. They say, quote, Crimea, Luhansk, and Donetsk will be recognized as de facto Russian, including by the United States. So on our map here, deep state map with the orange and red being territories, orange and purple, currently occupied by Russian forces. So we've got Crimea down here in the south that has been taken by Russia since 2014. Let's see, we've got Luhansk and Donetsk. So Luhansk up here in the most easternmost oblast in Ukraine. I think all of it now is held by Russia. Maybe there were some small outlying portions. We'll say here we go, right here. So most of it held by Russia, probably in the 99 percentile. However, they also say Donetsk. So right here, you'll see this is where the battles for Pokrovsk, Konstantinivka, Slavyansk, Kramatorsk are all playing out right now. This is territory that, according to this new peace plan, Ukraine will be ceding to Russia. So this will be referred to by the United States as Russian territory. A key note here in Donetsk, they say Ukrainian forces will withdraw from this portion here that they currently control, and this zone will be considered a neutral, demilitarized buffer zone internationally recognized as territory belonging to Russia, but Russian forces will not enter this demilitarized zone. If that sounds a little bit ridiculous and crazy and probably not something that you would like to trust or feel like you could trust, you're kind of getting the idea of what this whole proposal is going to look like. So that's Luhansk, Donetsk, and Crimea. Moving over here to these other two territories that are currently contested, Kherson and Zaporizhia. So get the names on the map here. Kherson a little further to the southwest. Zaporizhia, let's see if these actually pop up on the map. So Kherson here to the west, Zaporizhia a little to the east. These will be frozen along the line of contact, which also mean de facto recognition along the line of contact. They say Russia will relinquish other agreed territories it controls outside of the 5 regions. So real quick, Zaporizhia, this area to the north would be controlled by Ukraine, with the line of contact being the de facto international border, I guess it sounds like. And in Kherson, that border would be right along the river. Now, in terms of what Russia would be handing back, it sounds like maybe a little bit of territory here in Kharkiv and in Sumy. These are just little buffer zone strips that Russia tried to take about a year ago, a little less when it comes to Sumy. So not a lot of strategic importance to either one of these. It sounds like those under this plan would be returned to Ukraine. Now, bouncing back through this peace proposal here, they say that number 3 is that it is expected that Russia will not invade neighboring countries and NATO will not expand further. First off, kind of crazy that we have to put into a peace proposal, hey, the illegal invasion you guys carried out, you can't do that again, right? You're going to agree to not do that again. Russia said, yeah, no problem. We'll agree this time. This is awful. The NATO piece here, like the fact that Russia, we are confirming to Russia that NATO will not expand further is incredibly broad, vague, and to be blunt, it neuters the alliance. It's a promise that we're not allowed to make either. We can't make that promise, by the way. I guess technically what we're doing here is saying that we will never again vote for anybody to join NATO. Is that really, like, we think Russia has that authority? That we will never expand ever again? That's a decision between the NATO alliance and the states that ask to become a member of NATO. But according to this document, we are ceding that to Russia right here. NATO will no longer expand. Kind of gives Russia de facto veto over any future NATO membership. Now, the way a country comes into NATO is with unanimous consent across the 32 member states. So technically, if the United States, through this document, is saying we will never again vote for a country to join NATO, that's it. NATO will no longer grow any larger. I would argue the entire alliance would be pretty neutered if Russia has that degree of influence over the alliance. Number 5, Ukraine will receive reliable security guarantees. It states that any future, quote, significant, deliberate, and sustained armed attack by Russia on Ukraine shall be regarded as an attack threatening the peace and security of the transatlantic community, and the United States and its allies will respond accordingly, including through military force. The document includes lines for signatures from Ukraine, the United States, the European Union, NATO, and Russia. The security guarantee would be for an initial 10 years and could be renewed by mutual consent. First off, Russia is signing this? What? And they get a say on whether or not the security guarantee to protect Ukraine from them gets renewed in 10 years? Are you kidding me? Like, I don't know which part of this is the most ridiculous as we move through, but that's up there. Now, Michael Weiss, will have some of his articles linked in the description below, did some great breakdowns here, where he said, quote, significant, deliberate, and sustained, doing a lot of work here. What happens if it's little green men or Ukrainian, quote, separatists or a salvo of missiles on a Ukrainian city? All denied by the Kremlin or spun to be a Ukrainian false flag as used as the pretext for the full-scale invasion. Article 5, NATO Article 5 is much clearer, quote, an armed attack against one NATO member shall be considered an attack against all members. Now, look, the reason there's going to be no teeth in this security guarantee. When you remove NATO as an option and say, but we're going to do a security guarantee, you can guarantee that security guarantee is not going to have teeth and it's not going to be very realistic. The only reason that Russia does not want Ukraine in NATO is because of the Article 5 security guarantee. That's it. That is the sole reason. So if we say no NATO, but we are also going to provide a security guarantee, do you see how that security guarantee will no way live up to the actual guarantee that's currently enshrined in the NATO alliance? So this will be lesser. There will likely be some outs. And already we can see that it has to be significant, deliberate, and sustained. We've seen how operations have occurred not just in eastern Ukraine, but kind of some gray operations, gray zone type operations that Russia is very, very proficient in. This would likely not rise to a response from the United States or any coalition providing support for Ukraine's sovereignty. Number 6, the size of the Ukrainian armed forces will be limited to 600,000 personnel. Disregard the number there real quick, but think about this in any other scenario. So we have a country here, Russia, that started a war by invading their neighbor, Ukraine. They take some of Ukraine's territory, and then the international community comes in and says, hey, guys, and they go to the victim and they say, you guys need a smaller military, and we're going to cap it. You can't make it any bigger than that. And we leave the aggressor as is. Give me another example in history where that's the case. We are protecting the aggressor from the victim in this case. This one's up there. If we're talking about the most ridiculous segment, this one's got to be up there. Number 7, Ukraine agrees to enshrine in its constitution that it will not join NATO, and NATO agrees to include in its statutes a provision that Ukraine will not be admitted in the future. Number 8, NATO agrees not to station troops in Ukraine. It sounds like this proposal was put forward without really consulting our European partners at all. There are multiple countries having ongoing conversations about this coalition of the willing that could include as little as training Ukrainian troops inside of Ukraine. This agreement kind of blocks that, just shuts that down entirely. Number 11, Ukraine is eligible for EU membership, which good, but also isn't it kind of weird that here we have the United States and Russia agreeing what international organizations Ukraine can try to join? I feel like that's a conversation between Ukraine and the European Union. I'd be interested to see the EU's response to this because it kind of sounds like the US and Russia are speaking for the EU. We don't. I feel like this is probably one of those little things that's just going to drive a stake even further, a wedge even further in the transatlantic relationship. Just our stepping in and assuming that we can make that determination. And I don't think we're in the place to be able to. I don't think we can do that. Not a matter of should we. I don't think we can. I have a feeling that Europe's going to hear that and go, okay, right. Number 12, a powerful global package of measures to rebuild Ukraine, including but not limited to the creation of a Ukraine Development Fund to invest in fast-growing industries. The U.S. will cooperate with Ukraine to jointly rebuild, develop, and modernize Ukraine's gas infrastructure. The U.S. will enter into long-term economic cooperation with Ukraine on a number of items here, and then Russia will be invited to rejoin the G8. Those are the big ones that jumped out at me. Now, there was some pushback here that I saw circulating far and wide across the internet that this was a Russian document. And kind of the core of that is coming from The Guardian, where they looked at some of the syntax, saying, quote, it is expected is a clunky passive construction in English. The Russian version makes more sense and is familiar verb form. Other Russianisms that appear to have crept into the text include ambiguities and to enshrine. I would not read too awful much into this. I feel like it's worth addressing because it's kind of being framed as this was a Russian plan presented to the United States and we translated it and handed it to Ukraine. Maybe. God, I hope that's not actually what happened. That is unfortunately a bit of a possibility. Witkoff is in the middle of this, and we have not seen a lot of competence when it comes to some of these negotiations from Steve Witkoff. So I unfortunately wouldn't put that past him. But don't read too much into this. We do use those terms. It is expected, ambiguities, and to enshrine. I feel like I've seen those in a fair number of U.S. documents. That's not a red flag in and of itself. Also, it looks like this document was leaked to Axios, and it may have been leaked by the Russian side, which means that the text may have been in Russian when it was translated by Axios. So bringing it up, it's a thing. I wouldn't dig too much into that one quite yet. Now, before getting into the responses here from Ukraine, the United States, Europe, and Russia, quick fundraiser update. So we're in the process of raising $100,000 for the 429th Separate Unmanned Systems Regiment, Achilles. We're at about $37,000 last I checked. We're working on a couple more interviews for you guys to kind of share some of the tactics and techniques, the modern ones, the most current ones coming out of the fight. What we're doing for Achilles is picking up interceptor drones. So for those donors that are willing and able to contribute, $200 plus gets you an Achilles patch, $1,000 plus gets you a signed flag by members of the Achilles unit. And these interceptors are used all shapes and sizes. So they're used to bring down everything from the Russian Shahed-style drones that are being flown against Ukrainian cities day in and day out, Orlan, Supercam, reconnaissance-style drones, all the way down to the FPV small drones that are going after Ukrainian soldiers and vehicles day in and day out. So Fundraiser teamed up with Zynga's Paw to help get them a couple more of these interceptors. If interested and able, that link is in the description below. Now, turning to the Ukrainian response, it's not been great, to say the least. Zelensky had a pretty significant response or video to the Ukrainian people yesterday that I have not seen fully translated. I'll link the source in the description. It has subtitles in English, so you can check it out. And I'll source the original one as well. But to call out a couple key statements here that stood out to me, he said, quote, "Right now is one of the hardest moments in our history. Right now, Ukraine is under some of the heaviest pressure yet. Right now, Ukraine may find itself facing a very tough choice, either the loss of our dignity or the risk of losing a key partner, either the difficult 28 points or an extremely hard winter, the hardest yet, and the dangers that follow, a life without freedom, without dignity, without justice, and that we must trust somebody who has already attacked us twice. Because everything else rests on this, our sovereignty, our independence, our land, our people, and Ukraine's future. We will and must do everything so that as a result, the war ends, but Ukraine does not end. Europe does not end, nor does global peace. We count on our European friends who fully understand that Russia is not somewhere far away. It's right next to the EU's borders. The Ukraine today is the only one separating comfortable European life from Putin's plans. We remember Europe stood with us. We believe that Europe will stand with us." And look, a major takeaway from that speech is that Zelensky does seem to be shifting more and more towards Europe as kind of the sole backer of Ukraine. I wish that wasn't the case. I think the United States has a role to play here. Unfortunately, I think that is probably Ukraine's best bet now and has been for some time, to focus much more on their European relationships and not expect a lot from the United States going forward. Partially because I think our current president doesn't view this as affecting us at all. In fact, we're going to hear that from him here in just a moment. Now, another Ukrainian response here came from Kristina Havashin. My apologies in the pronunciation there. It's the Ukraine's deputy permanent representative to the United Nations, who gave a speech after this plan was leaked, saying a couple of key things. One, our land is not for sale. We will never recognize the occupied territories as Russian. Two, helping Ukraine defend itself is not escalation. It is the only viable path towards peace. And to that, three, finally, the only way to get to peace is to force Russia to that end. Let's give that speech a quick listen.
Ukraine has officially received from the American side a draft plan. We outlined the fundamental principles that matter to our people. We agree to work on the plan's provisions in a way that would bring about a just end of the war. In this context, allow me to make several critical points. First, while Ukraine stands ready to engage in meaningful negotiations to end this war, including at the leaders' level, our red lines are clear and unwavering. There will never be any recognition, formal or otherwise, of Ukrainian territory temporarily occupied by the Russian Federation as Russian. Our land is not for sale. Ukraine will not accept any limits on its right to self-defense or on the size and capabilities of our armed forces. Nor will we tolerate any infringement on our sovereignty, including our sovereign right to choose the alliances we want to join. Any genuine peace process must respect a fundamental principle: nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine, and nothing about Europe without Europe. And let me be equally clear, we will not reward the genocidal intent that underpins Russian aggression by undermining our identity, including our language. Second, support for Ukraine is indispensable. Peace requires strengthened security and sustained financial assistance to Ukraine. Reinforcing Ukraine's defense capabilities is not an escalation. It is the only path to compelling Russia to engage constructively in international peace efforts. In this regard, we express profound gratitude to all partners and allies. This support is an investment in the rules-based international order and global peace. Third, the Kremlin regime will not stop unless it is stopped through unyielding and concerted pressure. There is only one realistic path to ending this war. Russia must be compelled to retreat economically, politically, and militarily.
So then turning to the U.S. response, or at least what we've heard so far from senior officials, because it's really not much, President Trump in the Oval Office yesterday was asked about this, and it, I think, really summarizes why this looks the way it does. he does not believe that what is happening right now between Russia and Ukraine affects the United States. I strongly disagree with our president on this take, but here's what he had to say.
We have a way of getting peace, or we think we have a way of getting peace. He's going to have to approve it. Just so sad, so many people. Last month they lost 25,000 soldiers. This is something, we haven't seen anything like this since the Second World War. And they're averaging 6,000 or 7,000 a week between the two of them, dead soldiers. And it goes on, and I think they're getting reasonably close, but I don't want to predict. I would have said that would have been one of my early ones. I did 8 peace deals of countries, including in India, Pakistan. You could even go, in fact, they're coming here in a week or two, go to the Congo and Rwanda. That was 10 million people dead, and we worked something out on that. But so many, and the one I thought would have been, for me, because I have a very good relationship with President Putin, I thought that would have been maybe quicker. But it does take 2 to tango. And now you just see all the death. And, it doesn't affect us other than the fact that we don't want to see all those people that really it's on the other side of the ocean. It's a war that should have never happened. It did happen.
So again, for so many reasons that we've articulated in countless videos, we can't ignore this and pretend like the largest land war in Europe since World War II has no bearing on the United States at all. We're very fortunate that we are in a position where we are not feeling the direct impacts of this war in terms of shells and missiles landing on our territory, in terms of our people being killed or wounded. We're not there. But I think it's a lesson learned throughout history that as we watch something like this play out, if we don't stop the aggressor and punish the aggressor to some degree, prevent them from wanting to do it in the future, that just opens us up for the possibility of a much larger war that we do not have the luxury of sitting out of like we do this one. Now, Michael Weiss of The Insider, again, I'll link his work in the description below, in his analysis here said, quote, "What struck me as odd about this whole affair was that for such a multi-authored, month-long project, no one from the American side was willing to go on the record or talk about it. Everything was on background comment, except for Dmitriev, who is too happy to talk about it. Moreover, the State Department was silent. All journalist inquiries directed at Foggy Bottom, State Department headquarters, were not even redirected to the White House, which is highly abnormal on matters of foreign policy sensitivity. Only a week ago, Rubio said at the G7 that Russia was not interested in peace, and Ukraine cannot cede the rest of Donetsk to Moscow. Now he's supposedly an architect of exactly that demand." It is weird when you think about it. And you wonder if Rubio is just kind of jumping on board now, saying that he is a part. Just on the 19th, as this was coming out, Rubio put out a statement saying, quote, "Ending a complex and deadly war such as this one in Ukraine requires an extensive exchange of serious and realistic ideas, and achieving a durable peace will require both sides to agree to difficult but necessary concessions. That is why we are and will continue to develop a list of potential ideas for ending this war based on input from both sides of this conflict." That made it sound very much like this is a work in progress, which is a very different tone than we're hearing today, where Secretary of the Army Driscoll supposedly have said, like, this is it, take it or leave it. Now, one of the issues here, or the questions, is that just 6 days ago, Secretary Rubio was asked, is it your assessment that Russia does not want peace? And he said, look, we only can go off of what we see. Russia continues to wage this war. Here's Secretary Rubio just 6 days ago.
Is it your assessment that Russia does not really want peace?
Well, we can only go by what we see. I mean, I think they've stated clearly what they want is they want the rest of Donetsk, and obviously the Ukrainians aren't going to agree to that. So what we see now is they continue long-range strikes into Ukraine, obviously to degrade their electrical grid and try to demoralize the country or what have you. And they've made some gains in Donetsk, and they're losing 7,000 soldiers a week. 7,000 dead soldiers a week from Russia's side. So as of now, I mean, that's the assessment we have to make. They've made a demand that Ukraine can't agree to, and so we're sort of where we are at this point.
And we are starting to see a little bit of pushback in Congress. A note yesterday from Senator Roger Wicker, a Republican, said, quote, "This so-called peace plan has real problems, and I am highly skeptical it will achieve peace. Ukraine should not be forced to give up its land to one of the world's most flagrant war criminals in Vladimir Putin. The size and disposition of Ukraine's armed forces is a sovereign choice for its government and people. and any assurances provided to Putin should not reward his malign behavior or undermine the security of the United States or allies. In particular, any suggestion that we can pursue arms control with a serial liar and killer like Putin should be treated with great skepticism. I hope we see more people coming out pushing against this. This plan at its core is certainly more sympathetic to Russian demands than Ukraine. It's not close in that regard. I would argue this is a little bit better for Russia than it is even the United States. I think we are losing in this negotiation. I think we are coming out on the wrong end here. It seems like it's still in the works to a degree. Ambassador Julie Davis, the ambassador to Ukraine, said, quote, "Today, the Secretary of the Army and I met with our allies and partners in Kyiv as we continue to build momentum for an extraordinary chance at peace. The issues before us are consequential, and the time to resolve them is now." It doesn't sound like that meeting went all that well. Christopher Miller, reporting for the Financial Times, said, quote, "According to senior European officials I spoke with about the meeting, it did not go well. One senior European official described the tone of the meeting as nauseating. U.S. Army Secretary Daniel Driscoll warned European ambassadors and Western officials that Washington would show little flexibility. Quote, "We are not negotiating details. We need to get this shit done." End quote. It is interesting that Driscoll is all of a sudden at the middle of this negotiating setup. He hasn't been involved at all. It's surprising that they're just kind of jumping right over Secretary Hegseth. There's some relationship stuff there between Driscoll and Vice President Vance, but this is random. It's a random person to all of a sudden throw right into the middle of these major negotiations. It might be because General retired Kellogg, is set to leave and remove himself from this process. That's the story right now. There's kind of some mixed reporting that maybe he was fired, but either way, according to Reuters, they say Trump's special envoy for Ukraine, Keith Kellogg, has told associates he plans to leave the administration in January, a departure that would mean the loss of a key advocate for Ukraine in the Trump administration. Special presidential envoy is a temporary designation, and such envoys, in theory, must be confirmed by the Senate to stay in their positions past 360 days. Kellogg has indicated that January would be a natural departure point given existing legislation, according to some sources who requested anonymity to discuss private conversations. Not sure that we have heard any official statements from Kellogg. I would expect him to keep it pretty professional and just say it's time to move on and he's done great work and he has other things he's looking forward to, whatever it might be. But either way, when it comes to, there's been a lot of criticism of Kellogg, certainly, since he's been in this role. I would argue he has been one of the better voices for Ukraine during this process. I think has a much more clear view of the threat that Russia poses compared with, say, Steve Witkoff, that again and again seems like he talks to Russia and comes back and relays something that is like they probably can't believe it. The Kremlin is like, I seriously, the guy said the exact thing again. We thought for sure he thought we were joking or that we would water it down. So, we take Kellogg over Witkoff, and it's certainly a challenge that Kellogg is going to be leaving that post. Now, turning to the European response, we have Laurie Bristow, a former British ambassador to Russia, saying there's no way this actually gets to a lasting peace, kind of suggesting that we are looking once again at appeasement in Europe. Here we go.
It mean, do you think, that Putin has essentially said yes to this deal?
Well, look, I think, to cut to the chase, this is an absolutely dreadful deal in both substance and process. I think, the fact that Mr. Putin has said it's the basis for a deal and Mr. Zelensky has rejected it tells you basically everything you need to know. I think, what this really amounts to is there is no way that this can deliver a meaningful, just ceasefire in the conflict, much though pretty much everyone other than Mr. Putin might want that. It looks more like terms of surrender.
We also had a pretty scathing note for Europe here from Gabrielis Landsbergis, the former foreign minister of Lithuania, where he said, quote, "There is a glaringly obvious message for Europe in the 28-point plan. This is the end of the end. We have been told repeatedly and unambiguously that Ukraine's security, and therefore Europe's security, will be Europe's responsibility, and now it is entirely. If you are a European leader asking your team to book you on the next flight to Washington to go talk to daddy, please don't. Not without a plan. Not cap in hand, not humiliating us in front of the cameras at the Oval Office. Europe is our continent. Our future is decided here, not there. We aren't poor. We have options. We can finally decide to assist Ukraine to the full extent of our very extensive capabilities, restore European dignity, and defend Europe. or we can continue to wait for the miracle we now know is not coming. Look, harsh words. I think he's right. Again, I've said this repeatedly. I wish he wasn't right. I think the United States has a lot to gain by being heavily involved in supporting Ukraine in this conflict and standing side by side with our NATO allies as we face down Russian aggression. I think that is to the net benefit of the United States near and long term. It puts us in a better strategic position in Europe. I think walking away from that is something that we are going to regret. It's just a matter of how much we have to regret this going forward. That said, if you're Ukraine, if you're Europe right now, that is probably the best move, is to assume that the United States is not going to be standing by you, especially in the face of Russian aggression. Now, turning to the Russian response, Putin put out a statement. He was on camera saying, quote, "This plan can serve as the basis for a final peaceful settlement, but it has not been discussed in detail with Russia. The USA does not discuss the peace plan for Ukraine directly with Russia because Kyiv and Europe are against it." So right away, Putin kind of suggesting that like they actually didn't have input here or they were not involved. Again, that directly contradicts other statements that we're getting about this and kind of suggests that he may be distancing himself. Well, hold on, we actually didn't have any input here. And you can see where he would get to that point as we had multiple Russian mill bloggers in the last last day or so come out saying this is an awful deal. We shouldn't take this. We don't need to take this. We can get everything we need on the battlefield. And that might be a reason that we're seeing Putin kind of back off a bit. He said Russia is satisfied with the situation on the battlefield, which leads to achieving the objectives of the special military operation by military means. If Kyiv does not want to discuss Trump's proposals and refuses them, then both they and the European instigators of war must understand that the events that happened in Kupiansk will inevitably be repeated on the other sections of the front. Maybe not as quickly as we would like, but inevitably it will be repeated. So he's talking about how in recent days we've seen some Russian flag raisings in the eastern city of Kupiansk that, I mean, it was a serious fight that was there, but by no means like the massive Ukrainian city or a major Russian victory. But that's what Putin is pointing to, is we're ready to keep doing that over and over and over again as needed. He said, and overall, this suits us, since it leads to achieving the goals of the special military operation by armed means in the course of armed struggle. But as I have said many times before, we are ready for peaceful negotiations to solve problems peacefully. However, this certainly requires a detailed discussion of all of the details of the proposed plans. We're ready for that. Again, Putin saying, we just really haven't looked at it yet, guys, so what do you want from us? In that sense, how are you going to get Ukraine to accept it if Russia hasn't accepted it? And vice versa. So we'll see. I expect Ukraine to push back, and we should likely at this point expect Russia to push back as well, as there are some key components in here that are not directly in line with the Russian demands as throughout the war. Now, to give you an idea of how this is being presented and how any pushback is being viewed, if you don't like this peace plan, you're a warmonger. That's it. If you don't agree to the terms that are on the table, you just want war, you just want death, you must be profiting off the deaths of Ukrainians. That's essentially how Kirill Dmitriev, the Russian presidential envoy, is putting it. In just the last 24 hours, that is the term he has been hammering. And I'm calling that out because he puts out a lot of posts in English, and I just feel like we're going to see that. Any questioning of, is this correct or is this the right way to do it? Again, we've talked about it countless times on this channel. Ukraine wants peace. I want peace. The United States wants peace. I think a lot of countries around the world want peace. What we do not want is a fake peace. And we see people just sign some papers that kicks this war down the road and leads to, God forbid, a scenario like World War II where Hitler was appeased. That's what we're trying to avoid. This agreement does more of that than I'm personally comfortable with, and I think that a lot of people are comfortable with. So you're going to see some pushback on this, and it sounds like the lineup there is all of those people are warmongers. In just the last 24 hours, Dmitriev has said, quote, fantasy solutions built on Biden's fake narratives have only prolonged the war and suffering. Many EU and UK warmongers want to fight till the last Ukrainian. The U.S. peace framework can stop the Ukraine conflict and restore global security. Blessed be the peacemakers. He put out a poll on X. Do EU warmongers offer a realistic and actionable peace alternative to Trump's peace plan on Ukraine? EU warmongers continue to live within Biden's false narrative of endless war. EU and UK warmongers want to fight Russia to the last Ukrainian, and now they're throwing everything they have at sabotaging President Trump's peace plan. Because of warmongers' propaganda, many people miss that President Trump's plan is designed to save Ukraine from losing even more land and lives. Watch closely attackers of the peace plan and how they benefit from an endless war. Maybe they just hope to get a golden toilet. Warmongers hate President Trump's peace plan and do everything to sabotage them, launching vicious media campaigns bankrolled by the pro-war lobby. UK and EU anti-Trump warmongers are particularly active. So, keep an eye out in the next couple of days. You see the term warmonger thrown out there. This is probably where it began. I mean, what is that, 9, 10 warmonger posts in the last 24 hours? They're clearly hammering that phrase. But either way, I would expect there's a lot of pushback that needs to happen. There's no way that an agreement that Ukraine likely had very little of any input on, Russia is saying that they didn't have any input on, take that with a grain of salt, is going to be agreed upon in the next, what's the deadline, 5 days? We're going to see some pushback. We should see some pushback. That's the responsible thing to do here. But either way, kind of frustrating that we're back to where we are months and months and months ago, kind of trying to force Ukraine's hand and laying off any pressure of Russia. That hasn't worked before. I don't expect it to work here. We might be able to force something, but it's certainly not going to be a long-term durable peace. But that's all we got for now. Again, for those interested and able, the fundraiser for Achilles 429th Unmanned Systems Regiment, pick up more interceptors, is in the description below. But thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.